The holidays can be tough. And for anyone who's grieving, they can feel almost impossible. There's that pressure to be joyful when your heart just isn't in it. I remember one Thanksgiving after my dad passed, everyone was trying to be cheerful, but it felt like we were just going through the motions. The empty chair at the table, his terrible jokes that no one else could tell quite right. It was rough. And I know so many of you are going through something similar right now.
Yeah. What's interesting is how many misconceptions there are around grief,
Yeah.
especially during the holidays. Like we're supposed to be over it by a certain time, or that we shouldn't burden others with our sadness.
Right, like we're somehow doing grief wrong if we're not putting on a brave face.
Exactly. And these myths can make things so much harder. One article we have actually lists out some of the most common ones. It's almost like a checklist of things not to say to someone who's grieving.
Okay, let's dive into that checklist.
Yeah.
The first one that jumps out is the idea that we should be happy during the holidays. Like if we're not feeling the holiday spirit, we're letting everyone down.
Yeah. It's almost like grief has an expiration date, right? But the truth is, there's no timeline for healing. And pretending to be happy when you're not just adds another layer of pressure and guilt.
So true. Another myth that really resonated with me is the idea that we shouldn't talk about the person we've lost. Like mentioning their name will just upset everyone.
It's almost as if they've become taboo. But remembering them, sharing stories, laughing about the good times, these are all healthy ways to cope and keep their memory alive. In fact, one of the blog posts we read suggests setting aside a specific time during a gathering to share memories. Maybe light a candle, look at photos, tell those funny stories no one else can tell quite right. It allows space for grief, but also for celebrating their life.
That's a really beautiful idea. It's acknowledging the loss, but also honoring their presence in our lives.
And it helps to remember that grief doesn't follow a predictable path. One of the articles uses the metaphor of a fingerprint. Each person's grief is unique.
Which brings us to another big misconception. The first holiday season is the hardest. The reality is, grief can hit us in waves, years down the line.
Absolutely. Anniversaries, certain songs, even smells can trigger a rush of emotions. It's about recognizing those triggers and being gentle with ourselves.
And speaking of being gentle with ourselves, the materials we have emphasize self-care as a crucial part of navigating grief, especially during the holidays.
Yes. And I think we need to go beyond the generic take a bubble bath kind of self-care. These sources get into specifics.
For example,
One article talks about setting realistic expectations. It's okay to scale back on holiday traditions, maybe skip some events, or even choose to celebrate in a completely different way. You don't have to force yourself to fit into a mold that doesn't feel right this year.
that's so important. It's giving ourselves permission to grieve in a way that feels authentic to us. And I think that's where this 5-week series we put together comes in. We want to provide a space for exploring these ideas in more depth, offering practical tools and strategies to help navigate the holidays with a little more ease.
Exactly. Each week we'll be diving into a specific theme, and we'll be drawing on all the great insights from these articles and blog posts you've shared with us.
So to give you a taste of what's coming up, week 1, we'll be tackling the idea of sharing memories, creating those meaningful rituals to remember and honor the person we've lost. We'll have concrete tips on how to have those conversations, how to make space for grief without letting it overwhelm the entire gathering.
Week 2 gets into the heart of blending old traditions with new ones, acknowledging that things have changed, that we've changed, and finding ways to adapt and create new rituals that feel right for us now.
Week 3 is all about setting boundaries. How do we say no gracefully when we're already feeling emotionally drained? How do we protect our energy without feeling guilty? We'll be unpacking all of that.
Then for week 4, we'll dive into mental health support options. This might be therapy, support groups, or even just having a close friend you can talk to openly and honestly. There's no shame in seeking help, especially during a time like this.
And finally, week 5 addresses unhealthy coping mechanisms. We all have them, but it's about recognizing them and finding healthier ways to manage stress and grief. We'll be talking about things like exercise, mindfulness, and connecting with nature. Practical strategies that can make a real difference.
And it's important to remember that even within those specific areas, there's going to be a lot of individual variation. What feels supportive to one person might feel overwhelming to another.
That's where really tuning into ourselves comes in, right? Paying attention to what we need in each moment. One of the articles called it leaning into discomfort, which sounds counterintuitive, but it's about acknowledging those difficult emotions instead of trying to push them away.
Yes, and that can be incredibly challenging during the holidays, when everything around us is telling us to be merry and bright. One of the blog posts had a great suggestion, creating a safe space for yourself during gatherings. It could be a quiet room you can retreat to for a few minutes, or even just having a signal with a trusted friend that you need a break.
I love that. It's about having a plan in place, knowing that it's okay to step away and regroup when things feel too intense. And that ties into the whole boundary setting piece, which can be so difficult, especially with family.
One of the sources actually frames it as a form of self-respect. It's about honoring our own needs and limits, even when it means disappointing others.
It's almost like giving ourselves the same compassion we'd give a close friend who was going through this. We wouldn't expect them to pretend everything was okay, and we shouldn't expect that from ourselves either.
And that leads us to another important aspect of navigating grief during the holidays: finding ways to connect with our loved one's memory in ways that feel authentic and meaningful.
One of the things that struck me in the materials was the emphasis on ritual. It doesn't have to be anything grand or elaborate.
Sure.
It can be as simple as lighting a candle, sharing a favorite story, or cooking their favorite dish.
Exactly. It's about finding those small, tangible ways to keep their presence alive in our hearts, and it can be a way to include them in the celebration, even if they're not physically present.
I think for a lot of people, there's this fear that finding moments of joy or laughter during the holidays somehow diminishes the love or respect we have for the person we've lost. But the sources were very clear that this is the case.
Right. It's not about forgetting them or pretending they're not gone. It's about recognizing that grief and joy can coexist, and those moments of joy, however fleeting, can be a source of strength and resilience.
It's like we're carrying their memory with us, allowing it to shape our experiences,
Yeah.
without letting it define them entirely.
And as we go through this 5-week series, we'll be exploring all these nuances in more depth. Each week will build upon the last, offering practical guidance and support every step of the way.
We'll be sharing stories, offering suggestions, and hopefully creating a space where listeners can feel seen, heard, and understood. And you know, one thing that really stood out to me from all of this was the emphasis on self-compassion.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so crucial, but it's often the first thing to go out the window when we're grieving. We can be so hard on ourselves for not feeling or doing things a certain way.
Right, like we add this extra layer of suffering on top of the grief we're already experiencing.
Exactly. And that's why these sources really highlight the importance of treating ourselves with the same kindness and understanding we'd offer a loved one who is going through a tough time. One of the articles even suggests creating a self-compassion mantra, something you can repeat to yourself when those negative thoughts start creeping in.
Like, it's okay to not be okay.
That's a great one. Or, I'm doing the best I can in this moment. It's about acknowledging the pain without judgment, giving ourselves permission to feel whatever it is we're feeling.
Yeah. And you know, it's important to remember that healing isn't a linear process. You know, there will be ups and downs, good days and bad days. One of the blog posts uses this image of a spiral. We might revisit similar feelings, but each time we do, we're approaching them from a slightly different perspective.
That's a really helpful way to think about it. It's not about getting over grief, but rather learning to live with it, allowing it to become a part of our story without letting it define us.
And I think that's the message we want to leave you with today. You know, there's no right or wrong way to grieve, and there's no set timeline for healing. Be patient with yourself, honor your needs, and seek support when you need it.
And remember, you're not alone in this. The holidays can be a challenging time for many people, and there are resources available to help you navigate this season with a little more ease and a lot more self-compassion.
Yes. We encourage you to join us for this 5-week series. As we dive deeper into specific strategies for coping with grief during the holidays, we'll be sharing stories, offering practical advice, and hopefully creating a space where you can feel seen, heard, and supported.
And in the meantime, if you find yourself struggling, reach out to a trusted friend, family member, or a mental health professional. There's strength in seeking support, and it's a reminder that even in the midst of grief, we are not alone.
Thank you for being here with us today. Take care of yourselves.